it was a book, but the reason I like movies, the reason I am good at that is because I'm just a very visual thinker. When I was in undergrad, one of the reasons I pivoted to movies was I started to realize I was actually sort of doing shot lists in my short stories. I was writing these very visual things. People were like, what's going on? And I was essentially like, oh, well, you got to imagine it's like, the movement and the spin, essentially camera, right? And I've learned to translate that into my prose as I've gotten older. But when you read my book, there are a lot of action sequences. There are a lot of things that I've thought about how they could be in the movie, right? How they're blocked. And I think that just helps when you're writing too. Sometimes people are like, oh, you just imagine these things. I really think about like, all right, I've imagined this building. What's it actually look like? Where's the furniture? What's happening in these sequences so my characters can actually interact with each other? Where are they moving? And have it make sense and create that verisimilitude of you feel like it's a lived-in world.
Everybody, welcome back to the Living the Next Chapter of the podcast for authors, and we get to talk about all things authorship and get to meet great writers who do amazing things in their space. And Josh is here on the podcast. We're going to talk about his journey, and he's got a lot of great stories to share, which I'm looking forward to getting into. And he's got some advice for authors as well, which we love to kind of honor the authors listening to the podcast and encourage you, like Josh, to get out there, write your story, share your message with the world. Josh, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. So glad to have you here.
Well, I'm excited to be here, David. Thanks for having me on.
This is
ready
fun.
To get in and talk about some writing.
Let's do this, right? I like to start here, Josh, because I love kind of celebrating where all my guests are from around the world. I get to talk to authors all over the globe, and I love when I can kind of, in my mental map of the world, I can drop a pin on your location. Where are you right now in this big world of
Yeah, right now I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, and tomorrow I'm off to Los Angeles. I've always kind of split my time between the two. I grew up and was born and raised in Arizona, and then moved there when I went to grad school. Moved to LA when I went to grad school and went to USC, and was there full-time for about 16 years and started splitting my time for some work opportunities that my wife and I had. And, it's just a quick drive or a quick flight back and forth. So I love doing both.
Excellent. Yeah, I mentioned to you that I've been to Phoenix before several times from Canada. And the temperature change was a drastic slap in the face for me as a Canadian, especially in August. To go to Phoenix in August was an experience. Let's put it that way.
Well, now's the time to come to Phoenix. It's beautiful. I'm in a light pullover. I was just outside for a while, and it's beautiful. Yeah.
Nice.
But yeah, if you come in July, come prepared. Bring a lot of water.
Coming out of an air-conditioned airport in that heat for the first time, having any point of reference, and walking into that for the first time, it was like an oven door open in your house, right?
Well, like I said, when I said I grew up here, when I went to Stanford for undergrad, so I felt like I'd died and gone to the rainforest when I moved up to Northern California. I'd never seen so many trees in my life, but people would always be like, "Hey, you live in Arizona, it's so hot." And I remember always telling them, 18, 19-year-old me, it was like, well, you just go from like your air-conditioned car, you run through the heat, and you go in your air-conditioned building, and then you sit in the air-conditioned building and go back to your air-conditioned car. So, you definitely, when it's 120, those few days, you hide.
Right. I remember walking down the street and you walk past a bar or patio and you get misted. All of a sudden you get soaking wet. You're like, what the heck? I live near a big mister called Niagara Falls, and we get that for free. Like, that's all the time, right? So I was kind of used to the misting, but I didn't expect it. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, we create humidity in Arizona. We don't have it.
You guys make it happen. I love it. It's good. Josh, tell us a little bit about your background prior to starting your author journey. Tell us a little bit about what you've kind of done in the past. So I'd like to kind of start there.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I mentioned, I went to Stanford. Like, when I went there, I had this dream of being a writer. I was going to be a novelist. I took a lot of writing classes when I was at Stanford. And when I was there, I took a film noir class that it was the first time in my life I'd ever really noticed a cut in a movie. I was watching Citizen Cannibal movies, very famous movie. And the cut I noticed is a very boring scene where a guy walks up to a pole, spins around the pole, and the camera's behind him. And then it matches to him in front, and they match the spin. And I just remember a light bulb went off in my head. And again, 19-year-old me was like, oh, wow, someone told him to move that camera. And it was the first time I'd ever really thought about that people tell people to move cameras. So I was like, I think I could do that. And I'd always loved movies. My dad's a big cinephile. We were big readers in my family too. So I've always been a storyteller. So it was a natural transition for me to kind of pivot to movies. And I ended up going to USC Film School and studying production there and learning to direct and work with actors, and continued my writing and pivoted into screenwriting and have continued to do that. And I had a movie come out a few years back called What Still Remains. It's a feature film that's still available out there on a lot of streaming services. And I wrote and directed that and was one of the co-producers on it. And, it's done well. And I've got a lot of scripts out there floating around and trying to get the next one to go. And now when I was in post on that movie, I started thinking about this idea for a movie that it was going to be a big space opera. I just had this idea for spaceships, kind of in the vein of a lot of these, Starship Troopers, Star Wars, that kind of vibe. And I had this other idea for this small, gritty LA noir detective, but in modern times, and kind of these two things I love. And I started thinking, well, what if they were the same story, and how could I fit those together? And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I love this idea. I'm excited about it. I think this movie is going to be very expensive, though. And I started thinking, well, what if instead of a movie, I went back to what I originally wanted to do and what I studied for, and tried to write it as a novel. And that is where Shadow of the Eternal Watcher was born, was trying to think, well, how could I get this in the hands of people? Because, when you write these scripts, sometimes you're writing them as calling cards. You're like, hey, read this. It proves I'm a good writer. Hire me. We're never going to make this movie, right? And I felt like that's where this was going to go. It's like, hey, maybe this is a cool genre calling card. But I already had those, right? I already had scripts that won some awards, were floating around, and I didn't need more calling cards. And I thought, well, maybe I go into a lot of these meetings, and they ask for intellectual property, which is IP for Pete. Mm-hmm. They ask for IP, which is like a book, a graphic novel, something that they can base the movie on and already have a built-in audience. And no one knows what's going to happen. But I was like, well, maybe I'll write my own IP, and then no one can say, hey, I wish I had IP for this, because I wrote the IP. So that's where Shadow of the Eternal Watcher was kind of born from.
So when you're sitting down to write, are you still thinking through the lens of this as a movie, or are you thinking of it as a book standalone?
It was a book, but the reason I like movies, the reason I am good at that, is because I'm just a very visual thinker. When I was in undergrad, one of the reasons I pivoted to movies was I started to realize I was actually sort of doing shot lists in my short stories. I was writing these very visual things, and people were like, what's going on? And I was essentially like, oh, well, you got to imagine it's like, the movement and the spin, essentially camera, right? And I've learned to translate that into my prose as I've gotten older. But when you read my book, there are a lot of action sequences. There are a lot of things that I've thought about how they could be in the movie, right? How they're blocked. And I think that just helps when you're writing too. Sometimes people are like, oh, you just imagine these things. I really think about like, all right, I've imagined this building. What's it actually look like? Where's the furniture? What's happening in these sequences so my characters can actually interact with each other? Where are they moving? And have it make sense and create that verisimilitude of you feel like it's a lived-in world.
Right. Yeah, not like your characters have just been dropped into this foreign space, and
and I think
there's a feeling, right?
Yeah, and that comes with just doing it and doing it badly and doing it again and doing it better, and you continue to write. If you're just like, oh, they're in a house, and everyone's seen a house. What's unique about this house? But like, if you just drop them in a void and tell your story, and it's like, oh, they're just talking, it doesn't matter. I feel like it does feel like it doesn't matter to you as the writer, right? And your readers pick up on that. Like when you try to create a reality for them with world building, with character interaction, with plot, all these things come together in amalgamation to create a good story.
For the authors listening, I have a lot of authors who are early in their journey as an author writing. They're coming here for any kind of wisdom or knowledge from you as a fellow author. Your unique lens, I used a movie term, your unique lens to how you write could really benefit them. around world building, let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
For a new author who's never done this before, like I've got 3 words on a piece of paper, Josh, I'm brand new.
Mm-hmm.
Give me like something I can hang my hat on around world building so that when I approach that in my book, I can start thinking through kind of your experience. World building, how do I do this?
Yeah. So, I mean, with world building, I think it's important for you as the author to know characters' backstories, world backstory. If you're creating a completely new fantasy world, it's important for you to know some of that history. I think the trap sometimes can be that you think you have to tell all that to people. And I don't think that's true. I think if you know it, your characters know it, and then as you create the world, the important details will come out. And, I think sometimes there's the greats, right? Like Tolkien is amazing at that, where he'll talk about a mountain. And you're like, oh, I'm still reading about this mountain for 20 pages. Well, most of us aren't that writer. Right. And most modern readers don't want to read about the mountain for 25 pages. So you have to pick and choose your moments. I remember I took a class at Stanford and they literally said, everyone's seen a barn before. What are the 2 things about the barn that matter? And paint your picture and move on, right? And I think as a screenwriter, you have to be so utilitarian. You have to be so concise. You don't get 10 pages to describe something. You get like 2 sentences. So moving into a book, you feel like, oh, I have all this freedom to write whatever I want. But the screenwriter in me was always pulling it back. Okay, people are bored. I've letting people read this. They say, oh, love it. Started to drag here. Well, that's because I'm indulging myself a little too much in that world building. It needs to come back. And I think that's where young writers maybe think, oh, I'm the auteur. I wrote this. This is my vision. Accept it. But like at the end of the day, if you're writing for yourself, cool. But if you're writing for other people to read it and audiences, I think you as the writer have to think about, okay, I wrote this for me. I love this. Now, what are other people feeling? And what do I want them to feel? That's the main thing, is because when you release stuff, people, once it's out there, it's other people's interpretation and it's theirs. You wrote it, it's your baby, you put it out there. But then once people can interact with it however they want. They can love it, they can hate it, they can think about it. And your dream is right that you have some sort of Star Wars fandom that debates it on X for 9,000 million hours, because that means you're probably rich. And you can ignore all that. But really, you have to think about, well, what am I trying to convey to people? What emotionality do I want to have happen? And try to instill that in your audience. And as you get better at it. But you can't please everyone. You'll miss the mark sometimes. But I think that's a good mindset to be in, is what am I trying to get across? And I always think about when I'm writing a chapter, okay, well, what's my in? What's my out? And then what are my characters doing? What is the point of this scene? What is the point of this chapter for my characters? How are they growing? How is this moving the story forward? And if I can't answer those questions, it probably doesn't need to be in the story. Like if you're just like, oh, I wanted to introduce this one character and I just want them to hang out and have fun, that can be a good exercise for you as a learning tool to figure out like, okay, who are these people and what are they doing? But when you're going to put it in your book, you can have that scene, but it also has to move other things besides just like this cool thing between these 2 characters. It has to, I think, always advance the plot, always advance the character, and always advance your story forward to an inevitable conclusion. And if you're not doing those things, you probably need to go back and reanalyze what you're writing and try to add that in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And okay, so the other part I think too is some authors will go too far in the details and bury themselves in. You talked about the mountain for on and on and on about this mountain. Come on, like let's just get on with this. But sometimes authors default to too much detail.
Yeah.
Kind of where's kind of for you your approach? Where do you kind of say, okay, Josh, we got it. We know the color of their shoes. We know what they had for breakfast. Let's move on. Like, where do you kind of end that detail depth?
Well, I'm anyone who's a big describer out there, I'm your enemy, because I would prefer less. Less is more, I think. So, early versions of my book, for those who don't know, a 300-page novel is about 80,000 words, right? So there were earlier versions that were like 92,000, and I was like, okay, I'm digging this. And like I said, you let people read it. You have to, and you take the criticism, and people would say things to me, and I was like, I think I'm gonna really take a axe to this thing and shave it back a little bit. And I think I had a version that was down to like 77,000 words, and I think I went too far. And it's a journey, right? You're reading, and then people start to maybe not react to things, or they're confused by stuff. You keep letting people read it, and then you go back and I put stuff back in. I think this book ended up being about 85,000 words. It's a process. You have to learn what works and what doesn't, because I can sit here and say, oh, don't over describe, and then you got someone like Brandon Sanderson who describes a lot, and he's a billionaire, so good for him. I think we're all different. We have different styles, so like anything I'm saying, if it doesn't work in your style, then ignore it. But like at the end of the day, there are conventions that work, and I think you have to learn those conventions, learn the structure. When someone says 80,000 words, some people are like, oh, I want to write 250,000 words. Well, that's cool, but like you may not get that book published. If you're going to self-publish it, great. Like some of these longer things come from people who have maybe established themselves too, and then they get to do what they want. It's the same with screenwriting. Every page in a screenplay is about a minute. So when you go back and think about that, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to write a 2-hour movie. That's about 120 pages, give or take. But really, no one wants to read a 120-page script. When you start pitching these things, you realize you're really writing 90 to 100 pages. And your goal is to paint a picture in a screenplay that they can imagine a movie. So you still have to be descriptive and paint a picture, but you don't get to do it for 4 or 5 pages. You get to do it for like a page at most. And there better be a lot of slug lines for different scenes in there if you've got nothing but description and a lot of action happening. Otherwise, people are going to be like, what is this? It's very dialogue driven. So, I mean, it's all about finding what works for you and the snappiness of it, and then going back and reworking it until it works for other people too.
Do you think your background in having to do that is an advantage for you as an author, where maybe someone who doesn't have a background like you have, where they would have to learn how to do that?
Yeah, I think it is an advantage. I don't know, screenwriting and novel writing, they're like distant cousins. They're very different. Okay. They're not like brother and sister where you're like, okay, well, if I do one, I can do the other. There are amazing screenwriters who never write a book, and there's probably I know there are amazing novelists who could never write a screenplay. So they're definitely in between. So like when you're good at both, I do think they can lend each other to themselves. But then, like I said, some people love long descriptive literary novels, and that can work for them too. So it really, at the end of the day, I think it's what you're trying to do, but you have to remember there are gatekeepers out there. There are publishers, there are agents. And if you want to go that traditional path, you've got to check some of these boxes for them, right. Probably.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you were asking for advice. I mean, for me, because it's easy to talk about, oh, you write it. But when you sit down as a computer, you're like, I'm going to write a book. And I already mentioned, so 80,000 words is a book. Well, when you stare at a blank screen, 80,000 words, it's like, how am I ever going to write 8,000 words, right? And I always approach it like, okay, if I could do 500 words every time I sit down, that's my goal. Sometimes I'll do a lot more. Sometimes I'll write 1,000, 2,000 words. I don't write much more than that. There are people, you can read about these people who are prolific. And if you're one of those people, good for you. But if you're not, I think setting yourself an attainable goal, every time you sit down, 500 words. Now, a lot of you probably have jobs, so you can't maybe time block that much time. But what does it take you to do 500 words? Can you do that 4 times a week? That would be like 2,000 words. You'd have a book in 40 weeks, right? That's less than a year. That's long, and you'll probably do it faster. And then you got to rewrite it. But that, to me, makes it doable. And I wish someone had told me that when I was younger. You read Stephen King's on writing. I think he writes 2,000 words a day. And that might, to some people, be like, how can you even do that 7 days a week? Right. Do what works for you, but you have to show up and do the work, right? And you have to have a plan. Some people overplan and some people underplan. I'm probably right in between, probably closer to the underplanning. I like to kind of let my characters speak to me and find new ways to do it. But I do have a plan of where certain beats I want to have happen throughout the book. And then you can kind of tie string between those beats, and that leads you through the story. And then my other advice would be, don't obsess about your beginning too much. I mean, get it to work, but sometimes people will rewrite. I gotta get this beginning to really work, because then the end will be better. And that's true, but you may end up changing what you write at the beginning because you get to the end and you pay off something and you're like, oh man, I never really imagined it was going to be this, and this is so much better than what I had imagined originally, and I love it. But now I have to go back and make it seem like I always had that plan. So writing too is a lot of going back to the beginning, sprinkling breadcrumbs throughout, and making it seem like you were a genius all along, when in fact maybe you discovered that at the end. And that's writing. It's a lot of rewriting.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great approach. I think not get caught up in just the beginning and stuck. Like the book is waiting for you to uncover it, and you can come back anytime and tweak it.
Yeah, and that's true in screenwriting too. Screenwriting is very structured, right? It's very much about like, all right, here's your first act is about 20 to 30 pages. Here's your second act's about 60 pages. Your third act's about 15 to 20 pages. You end up with 90 to 120 pages, right? And you have midpoint, you have point of attack, and you learn these things. And sometimes I'll talk to people like, oh, I don't want to. And I was like this too when I was young. I don't want to read that book about screenwriting because I know how to write. I don't need someone to tell me things like that. But you learn these rules, right? 3-act structure, 5-act structure, how many pages, how many words are in something, right? You learn those rules. And then when you get better, you can break them on purpose to service your story. But if you don't know the rules and you're just break them because you don't know them, you're probably not writing a very good story. So I don't think there's anything wrong with reading people's on writing books and learning what other people do, and then make it your own and take what works for you and throw the rest in the rubbish pile and keep going.
Yeah. Okay, let's switch gears to the readers that are here that are interested in your book, The Shadow of the Eternal Watcher. They're going to grab a copy, but before they read, Josh, I want to kind of get I call it a love letter from the author to the reader. As I hold your book in my hand, I'm a first-time reader of your book. Before I even start, if you and I could sit down for coffee together and talk about this book and what I'm going to get out of it from a reader's perspective, what's your big wish? What's your love letter to us as readers? What can we anticipate? Tell us more about the book.
Yeah. So, when I started writing it, I thought about myself when I was a kid. I was like, what would that kid who used to sit in the science fiction section of the indie bookstore where I grew up in Arizona, what would he have wanted to pick up off the shelf and read? So, I mean, that's really what this book is. It's a big space opera adventure, but it starts out as a gritty, character-driven drama about this guy who's down on his luck, Duster Raines. He's a failed detective, a failed former LAPD detective, and also a former Air Force pilot hero who did some things in that war that he wished he hadn't done. And it's kind of led his life on a course that he didn't necessarily intend. And, it's really, like I said at the beginning, it's all about character for me. So this story is about Duster Raines. It's about his journey. He straddles this line between hero and anti-hero. And for me, it was interesting to think about this multiversal universe that exists, and what does that mean to someone when they find out that maybe that better life they always thought they were supposed to have actually does exist, and it's right here knocking at the door. And how does that make someone react? How does that make them feel about themselves? And Duster Raines is one of those guys who's never really felt like he belonged, but always knew he was supposed to do something else. So to me, I think that that's an interesting dynamic. And so multiverse, obviously, we've seen a lot of those lately. They've always been in comic books, but now it's become ubiquitous, right? But for me, it was more going back when I was a kid, watching the reruns of Twilight Zone, the black and white Twilight Zone, and just the what ifs of dimensional thought process, right? Like, what could happen? What if this happened? What if that happened? And so I was like, well, how do I do something different with that? So in my book, in my universe, there is another Earth. It's so different from ours, you wouldn't even recognize it. If you read about my book online, you might see things about time travel. It's not really time travel. This world is just advanced so far beyond us, it's almost like time travel. They're a few hundred years ahead of us. And it's so different, and it's changed thousands of years ago and broke off from being an exact duplicate of our own, that what you see, you wouldn't recognize it, right? You put them next to each other, they don't match. There aren't a version of everyone in this universe, but every now and then in the infinite cosmic universe of randomness, there are doubles, probably less than like 10,000 people. And when those people come in contact with each other, crazy magical things can happen in this universe. So that to me was an interesting idea. Being duplicated is unique and allows you to bend space time. I was like, I've never read that before. I feel like that would be really cool. I get spaceships. That's really cool. I get my gritty LA noir detective story. I love those when I was a kid too. I love mystery. So it really is just a lot of fun stuff. And when I set out to write it, I was like, I'm going to write an elevated page turner. So elevated, I mean, like it's well written, it's literary, but really it's fun, it's pulpy, and it always is driving forward. And I think every chapter ends, and I want people to be like, wow, what happens next? And keep reading. So that was my goal, and I think overall I achieved it.
So if your main character, Dusty Raines, could write the foreword of this book for you, from his perspective as the main character, in his voice, how would he describe this book?
I think he would say it's just the beginning of his journey, and wait and see what he's going to do next, because I think he thinks he's going to grab that brass ring and take it. So
okay,
it definitely stands alone, this book, but I am writing a sequel to it right now, and it has a bit of an open end where you're like, well, maybe, like I said, I wanted people to say what happens next, and I always like a book where you think what happens next too. So I am working on the next one right now.
Okay. And then just so we understand our main character in the book, what else do we need to know about his backstory? Maybe that would help us as readers to connect with him as the main character in the book.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, he's a former Air Force pilot, fought in the first Iraq War, Desert Storm, was shot down and survived in the deserts of Iraq and Kuwait on the border there, and had to do some things to survive that he regrets, and always debates whether or not he needed to do what he did. And that haunts him, and those demons rear their ugly heads. And what I think is interesting about Dusty Raines is you're not really sure as the reader, I think at the beginning, if you can even really trust him. We're first person, we're in his head. He's not always sober. He's not always lucid. He sometimes he literally says in the book, I sometimes see things that aren't really there. So you as the reader, at least from my perspective as the author, I think are questioning sometimes, is all this happening? Is this? And I think it's an interesting journey to go with him on to find out if it is happening.
Okay. I like this. Any part of you as an author finding it your way into the characters within the story at all?
Yeah. I mean, Dusty Raines is not me. You know, I always approach my characters as like an actor. I'm not an actor. I'm a director. I work with actors. But, you know, getting into the headspace of what would this person do? How would, trying to be method about it, how would they respond to this situation? Not how would Josh respond? And then sometimes I like to plant my secondary characters as my Greek chorus, right? The Josh Mendoza of like, maybe you shouldn't do that. But so, you know, I think some of my secondary characters, Carla, Juan, there's a little bit more of me in there, but you know, there's me in all of it. But I like to try to create things that are very different from my life. I did not fight in the Iraq War, and I did not have to suffer some of the tragedies that Dusty Raines had, but I've read about them. I've experienced other traumas and tragedies, and you try to pull on your own experiences to inform other people's experiences. And I always say too, I mean, that's why I think reading is so valuable and so important, because it allows you to enter other people's headspace, different cultures, different people, different genders, and really get outside of your own world and then see how other people live. And I think when you read more and you experience life like that, it allows you to get outside your own space and try to imagine what other people are thinking. And I think it helps just in day-to-day life as well, being a more empathetic person and a more understanding person too. And that's how I approach my writing too, is just trying to get into other people's headspaces and imagine what they would do.
Yeah. For the readers, people are listening to this going, okay, Josh, like, who would this be a great book for? Okay, people are listening for themselves because they want to come and support you as an author, but they're also thinking somebody else in my family or my community would also love this book. Kind of what are your age range for the book, and kind of who's your ideal reader? What did you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely 18 plus, I'd say. I mean, maybe a mature high schooler could read it for sure, but there's some language and graphic moments, so definitely not for children. My kids don't get to read it, so when they're older, they didn't get to see my movie either. But that's how it works. Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I think I didn't go. I'm not a big over the top sci-fi guy, fantasy guy when I write. I love reading the very sciencey science fiction. I'm more on the fantasy, magical science fiction side where it's very accessible. I don't get too in the weeds on like how the machines work. I try to base it in science and then I move on. So if you're listening to me right now, you're like, I'm not big into like how tech works. I think it's more of an adventure than a science fiction military tech book. So I would say I tried to write it to please those people who like those deep science-fi books. So there's something in there for them, but I wrote it broadly enough that I think it would appeal to a wider audience. And like I said, really the first half of this book is more of a detective crime thriller with sci-fi clues sprinkled in. And we're on a journey to find this other world, this big space opera that people have talked about in some of the reviews. So I think if you grew up loving some of those Dashiell Hammett books and the old Humphrey Bogart movies where, it's a mystery and it's real pulpy and it's real snappy one-liners and just kind of that fun, quintessential detective story. I've definitely tried to play with those stereotypes and then tried to bend them and shape them into something new and that we hadn't seen before. So that to me was the fun in writing it too, was these genres that I love, showing you things that you're used to seeing and then trying to bend your expectations with them too.
Okay. Any time during the writing process, you mentioned earlier in our conversation, you're a little loose in how you're writing your book. You're not really overly structured or tied to a certain way of doing it. You're really loose. So as you're writing it, you mentioned your characters talk to you. Was there any point where the story took a turn you weren't expecting as the author and you kind of followed your character or followed the story in a new direction that you weren't really anticipating at all?
Yeah, I mean, in early drafts, I definitely had ideas about this multiversal conflict where only these two Earths have survived and the humanity's trying to survive and in this more technologically advanced world and coming to our world. I had that general idea, but really the idea of being able to bend space-time came to me a little later. And I think that just added a fun element that I just thought made it more interesting to read and made it more what is happening. And like I mentioned, I like what if. So I think around the midpoint, I started to realize that was kind of coming out through some of these actions and started to go harder into that direction as I progressed through the rest of the book, and then went back and painted that picture more clearly at the beginning too. So that was definitely something that grew. It was always an idea, but it definitely grew and became what it is in the book now as I was writing it.
So if we could put a director's hat on you for a second, as we talk about the book, first out of the external watcher, it's time to pick your main character, and you have your choice across a few actors that you admire. Is there a familiar actor name that we would know that you would envision would be like, oh, if I could have them play this character, it would be such a great fit? Anybody kind of come to mind at all?
It's funny because I don't really write like that, honestly.
Okay.
And all the screenwriters out there are like rolling their eyes at me because usually you're like, okay, I wrote this for Ryan, for this actor or that actor, and when I was writing it, I mean, I think originally I was sort of thinking maybe like Pedro Pascal, but then like in writing it, I pivoted away from that look when I described him. But I think you could obviously. but was in great shape and younger. And that he obviously doesn't exist, but that was kind of a funny idea to me. And as I started to paint Rains, I thought he was kind of this dry, sardonic humor. So and maybe that's why I just said Ryan Reynolds, but sometimes he's over the top, but in his humor. But I think when he plays things more straight, that's kind of the idea I have for him too. Maybe not quite Detective Pikachu. Right. Yeah, exactly. Hey, Canada. Maybe not quite Detective Pikachu, but maybe if he dialed that back a little bit, we could have him in it too. And he's a great actor, but we'd be lucky to have him. That would be for sure.
Because the reason I'm asking, again, in the writing process, maybe not so much you're writing to the character that you could play this person, but it also helps us to kind of put a personality behind the character as we're reading. Mm-hmm. We're kind of like, he's kind of more like this type and not so much like this type. Because then it kind of gives us kind of anticipation of kind of, I'm familiar with this name. I know this person's work. So I could envision kind of their voice, their demeanor, their kind of how they present themselves as kind of the life behind the character. I just think it kind of helps to kind of get a kind of a point of reference. Or this person's completely different than everybody else we've ever met. And we're kind of blazing a new trail with our main character.
Yeah, well, I think, like I said, if you thought about Ryan Reynolds as playing it straight, if you thought about maybe Ryan Gosling in Drive, maybe if he were a little funnier. And, because it definitely has some humor and it has some Dustin Raines has some sarcastic wit to him. So he definitely has not taken care of himself in the sense that he's drinking himself into an early grave, but he has kept his old Air Force habits and he can run with the best of them down some dark tunnels and sprint away from some threats that you'll see when you read the book. So that's kind of what I imagine.
So if your name is Ryan and you're an actor,
exactly, it's only
Ryan Reynolds, then definitely reach out to Josh.
Well, that's why I said I was going to say Ray.
Right?
Yeah.
It's going to be.
That's why I said Ryan Reynolds. It's like, actually, that works. I was thinking Ryan Gosling, and then I was like, said Ryan Reynolds. I was like, actually, that's a better idea. So we'll go with that.
There you go.
Like I said, though, I don't. That's not the way my mind works. I don't think about people. And honestly, another confession, I'm the worst at remembering everyone's names too. So I had to think about it. But when you direct too, and you're casting, I think about. I'll give a casting director some generalities, but I think sometimes, let different types of people come in and surprise you. And there's no reason you can't change it too. And I think about John Chow when he was in that horror movie with the found footage thriller. And, I think that's just such a different play for him. And he's amazing in that movie. And he's different in Star Wars. And he's not what you would expect for that role, but he just is amazing in it. And I think when you let actors act, sometimes they surprise you. And I think it's true with writing too, but with directing, when you go in with your plan, if you're so beholden to it that you're trying to make them do something different, you have to convey what you want to them, but when you're casting them too, you should probably already be 90% of the way there with them, in my opinion. And you're making small adjustments on the day. If you're standing there giving the backstory and talking to them for 10 minutes before they go on, they're probably ignoring you anyway. But if anything, you're just making them nervous. And I remember when I was a young filmmaker doing a short at USC, I was doing that. I was talking to an actor. I was like, okay, we'd done a bunch of takes. It was kind of a complicated camera thing. So we kept redoing takes. And I wasn't quite getting what I wanted. And I kept giving her more. And at some point I looked at her, I could just tell she was she was older than me too, and just an older, really talented actress. And she was looking at me like, what are you talking about? Yeah. And I just said to her, I was like, you know what? Forget everything I just said. Just go out there and attack it. And she was like, okay. And she went and did it. And it was the best take. And she was like, she came up to me afterwards, thank you. I was kind of lost in what you were talking about. And that was a light bulb for me. It's I had this vision, but just because you have a vision and you tell someone it over and over and over again, that's not how actors act. Actors react. They respond to other actors and they live in emotionality and in the moment. And if you're being very, very analytical with them, you're just getting in the way of their process. And again, every actor is different too. So sometimes you have to adapt to their styles, but that was a lesson I learned at a very young age. And I take it into my writing too. that I'm not going to be overcommitted to some vision that I had before.
Yeah. Okay. So Josh, you mentioned that there's new things working in the future, which I'm excited about. My podcast is Living the Next Chapter. So I like to ask this question to my guests from time to time so that I can say the name of my podcast. But living your next chapter as an author, kind of what do you see coming down the road for you as a writer and an author? Like, what can we expect in the future from you?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm working on the sequel of this, and I'm excited about that. I'd had this book bouncing in my mind for a while, and I kept waiting because I was like, well, what if the publisher and my editors, what if we change it, right? And like I kill someone who's not dead, and I've written this other book, and so I kept waiting on that. So now the book's out, I feel like I've been given the green light to go write that next book. So I'm hard at work at that, and my kids keep bugging me that they want me to write something they can read, so. I've been bouncing around this kind of YA, middle grade. Again, I love sci-fi. So it's magical, space, sci-fi,
nice. Harry
Potter and space, right? But not Harry Potter. But, wizards and space is kind of the vibe. But I think it'll be a lot of fun. And yeah, I'm always I always try to do genre mashups. A lot of my scripts are genre mashups. I've got one that floats around that's Jaws with a Bear meets Deliverance, which is just a lot of fun and wacky, and that's very like in the Gabriel Garcia Marquez like magical realism vibe world, and that's fun. And I've got another script that I've loved. One of the first scripts I ever wrote, and I've rewritten it so many times it's unrecognizable, but it's a lot of fun. And I keep pitching that around. It's called 50 Miles to Mexico. It's basically a modern Western that's just a lot of fun, sort of like Hell or High Water, that kind of vibe. Yeah. Yeah, and in terms of what I'm writing next, I just am plugging away at those books and writing new scripts, and I just keep going. And you just got to keep creating because you never know what's going to click. And when someone raises their hand and says, "Hey, what do you got?" You got to be able to hand it to them, because if you're like, "Well, hang on, give me 6 months," you probably miss that opportunity. So I'm just always trying to create new stuff, and some of it goes and sits on the shelf, and some of it, like this book, comes out.
For the listeners, Josh, they want to connect with you. They want to follow your journey. They want to stay up to date on all your new projects and connect with you somehow. Is there a place where we can send them?
Yeah, well, you can come to my website, just my name, joshmendoza.com, and I've got a newsletter on there, and you can follow me. I'm on social media, all the things, Facebook, Instagram, at Mendoza Strikes, Twitter, Blue Sky. Yeah, come find me. Would love if you read the book and told me what you thought. It's available wherever you like to get your books. Obviously, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, those places. But if you've got a local indie bookstore you love, go in. They can order it. It's also on Audible and all these different audio book places as well. And we had a great actor, Kellen Boyle, give a great performance of Duster Rains. And I think there's a good version for you to go imagine what he could be like in Kellen's performance there in the audiobook.
I like it. The one thing in podcasting I know, Josh, is that we know the bad reviews and we know the really good reviews, because they kind of stick on us, kind of like lint on our shirt. For you, what's a great review of the book or a comment about the book that you just solidified for you as the author? Like, yeah, they get it. The reader gets it. This is what I hope for this book. Anything kind of stand out for you? You're like, that was a great comment that somebody left me about my book.
Yeah, and sometimes too, you can be a little, you hook onto the negative and you don't focus on the positive. But like, I've had people say that it was just a great adventure and they loved it. And, people have said that they found Duster Rains to be very funny. And I've had a few people really relate to Juan, who's a secondary character who's very near and dear to my heart. So that really meant a lot to me, that people related to him, that smart, introverted teenage kid who's trying to find his way in the world, and he kind of gets mixed up in this otherworldly adventure with Duster Rains too. And I think he was just a lot of fun to write. There's a lot of me in there, and when people responded to that, it really meant a lot to me.
Excellent, awesome. Yeah. We'll have links up for everyone in the show notes to go and follow Josh's journey and to go grab a copy of the book. Josh, one thing I always encourage my listeners to do when they buy your book, to leave a detailed review. It's kind of why I led you with that question. I was leading the witness there a little.
I appreciate it.
I like a great review I think it's our opportunity as readers to use our words back to our favorite author and support them, because other people are going to read those reviews. And beyond great book, great author, let's go a little deeper. Let's talk about why we really connected with the story, what this book means to us as a reader. I just think it builds this community around you as an author. I love reading those comments. It's great when people reach out and leave those. So I always encourage everyone to leave a great review for our authors.
Yeah, and honestly, as an author and as a film, it's the same in film too. I mean, I'm so appreciative when obviously there's the people in your tight-knit circle, and they'll go do it. But when strangers are reading you reviews and they're telling you what they responded to, and they're trying to help support the book, it really does help. So if you want to leave me a review on Goodreads, on Amazon, both of those places really do help. And people do read them, and it does help. It does encourage other people to read the books too. So it would mean a lot if you would take the time to do that.
Awesome. Josh Mendoza, thank you so much for being on Living the Next Chapter. Glad to have you here. Congratulations on the book, and excited to see what's happening for you in the future. I'd love to have you come back, give us an update in the future on your new projects, and let's just keep the door open. We'll keep a seat for you and invite you back when you're ready to come back and chat about more.
I'd love that, David. Yeah, I'll definitely be back when the sequel to Shadow of the Eternal Watcher is out, and all these people who've left me such nice reviews can come back and listen to me babble again.
Awesome. It was great. Awesome. Thank you for making time, Josh. Thank you for being on the show,
David.
everyone.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Everyone listening, make sure you go leave a great review. Make sure you go buy a copy for yourself and for the family member, relative, or someone in your community that's going to love this book as well. Buy 2 books. Don't just buy one. And Josh, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate you having me.
Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. Glad to have you here. I just want to let you know that you can always find out what we're doing live in the moment by going to our YouTube channel. Head over to livingthenextchapter.com. There'll be a link right there. Head over to our YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, do all the things that all the YouTubers love to say. And in our YouTube channel, a couple things. You're going to get advanced listens. You're going to get the episodes that we're working on in real time. So we record and post daily on our YouTube channel. I'd love for you to give us a follow over there. As well, we're making playlists. We have over 500 episodes. So finding the right episode for you, we're trying to group things into playlists. So if you like children's books, if you like business, you like historical fiction, we're grouping our authors together to make it a little easier for you to find your favorite next author. So head over to livingthenextchapter.com. And again, I'd love to hear from you. Hearing from the listeners of the show is great. And I just want to say thank you for being a part of the podcast family. And I look forward to having you back for the next episode. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time and your listen. Take care.